Most of my past videos have been about how to study for science subjects. In this video, I'm going to share with you how I note-take and study for math tests, specifically using the tactic of interleaving, which I think is the most powerful and underused tactic in studying for math tests. Sound interesting? Let's hop into it. Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is David Liu. I'm an incoming medical sciences and scholars elective student at Western University. So first is note-taking. I wanted to start by saying that I know a lot of math teachers have handouts that contain a lot of examples on them that we can follow through as the teacher teaches that example in class. I've never printed out that handout. I always write my own notes, whether on hand or on OneNote. Okay, so if I don't print out the notes, then what do I take notes on? Well, in class, the only thing I jot down are definitions and equations. For the examples, I'll do them on a separate sheet of paper and then throw out that sheet of paper afterwards. This forces me to remain hyper-focused during class and make sure that I really do understand those examples. If on that day I just don't feel like raising my hands, and usually the teacher will also upload their notes after the class, so I can just go access that, make sure I understand the example, and then throw out those examples. I think the most important part of learning is doing the homework. You often have to do more of the application and thinking in the homework. So a question you might have is, do I have to do all of the homework questions that the teacher assigns? The answer, usually no. Say the teacher assigns question 2A all the way to 2F. Often when they're different parts of the same question, they test pretty much the same content. So I will only do D, E, F and just skip A, B, C. I feel like if I can do the harder questions, D, E, F, I'll definitely be able to do A, B, C. So there's no point in even doing them. And this is the most important point that I want to drive home with note-taking. When you do these homework questions and there's a question that you don't understand, highlight that question. This will be so important later on when you study and will form the foundation of how you study and review the content. Cool, so that's note-taking. Now that we've talked about note-taking, let's talk about how to study for tests. I like to start studying for math tests 3 days in advance. And at the end of the video, I'll break down specifically what I do on each of those 3 days. My first step is always to read through my notes. So these notes will contain the definitions and equations, because how can we solve the questions without first knowing the equations we need to use to solve them? And the reason that highlighting questions that I didn't know was so important is because most of my studying is actually composed of answering those questions that I didn't know. And this is highly effective for 2 reasons. The first is that this is implementing the principle of active recall, because we are using practice questions, which forces our brain to retrieve information from when we learned it and apply it to the question we are doing now. The second is that the highlighted questions are questions that we found hard. We're doing questions that we're struggling with, instead of wasting our time doing easier questions that we already know. So we're getting the most bang for our buck and we're being most efficient with our studying. Doing a lot of hand gestures. There are 2 principles that we always should be implementing when studying. The first is active recall, the second is spaced repetition. And that's where interleaving comes in. The problem is that many of us tend to study section by section. So we'll do, say, 5 questions from 4.1, 5 questions from 4.2, and so on. And that's problematic because spaced repetition requires us to be repeating this information at intervals. And the thing is, after doing question 1 of 4.1, question 2 to 5, you're pretty much doing the same thing, except with different numbers, or maybe a slightly different style of question. Furthermore, your mind will begin to develop these tricks to help you solve the question based on what you did previously. So you'll remember, oh yeah, I multiplied 2 by 4 here, so I should be doing this and this and this, instead of actually understanding the process. So interleaving is when we just do a few questions from each topic and then repeat this over several days. So it might look something like this. Say we are studying for a chapter 4 math test and there are 6 sections. So on day 1, I would first review my written notes, so the definitions and the equations. Then I would do 2 questions from each section. So 2 questions from 4.1, 2 from 4.2, and so on. And then stop there after day 1. On day 2, I would do the remaining questions from each section. So maybe 3 more questions from 4.1, 2 more questions from 4.2. That way I'm getting a second repetition in of each topic. Then on day 3, I'll often do a practice exam, and that covers questions from all the sections, and it's a 3rd repetition of these topics that we're learning. And by implementing spaced repetition, we will remember them best for the test, and we're actually able to understand what's going on. We're not using shortcuts, and this will help us for the harder questions on that test. Let's keep this video short and sweet. Those are my top tips on note-taking and studying. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, I would really appreciate if you could like, comment, and subscribe. That was a really fun video to make actually. And if you want to see more videos like this, please let me know. Have an awesome rest of the day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye for now.